My name is Josh, and I grew up in Elgin, Illinois. My parents divorced when I was about 5 years old, just because of their own share of brokenness and bad mistakes and choices and things that they struggled with. And I can remember pretty vividly at 5 the severance of our relationships and them trying to figure out who was going to take care of me. In the end, I ended up going with my dad, who lived with my grandma just due to his addictions. And my dad was kind of wishy-washy. He was off and on, and so my grandma really ended up picking up the slack on that end. And I can remember when I was disappointed with my dad's choices or the way he would treat me or the way he wouldn't fulfill his promises. My grandma would always quote Psalm 68:5, which I want to read it to you here. God is a father to the fatherless and the defender of the widows. It was that verse that time and time again really laid a foundation for my faith and helped me see that God was there even when other people weren't. And so my grandma began to lay that foundation. However, when I was about 9 years old, I can remember my mom getting remarried and realizing she wanted to give her son the life that he never had. And so I came home from school one day, and there parked in front of the house was the sheriff. And he ripped me from my grandma's arms and placed me in my mom's arms. And that's a pretty traumatic moment in my life, to kind of be taken from what was become stable to a new stable for me. And so my mom stopped taking me to church, which my grandma had consistently done. And I just started to just kind of fumble out of control. Due to things that I'd seen when I was younger, I was just a very sexually confused child, a very mischievous child, and very rebellious. And so I got into a lot of trouble in school. Eventually, the school just didn't know how to handle me anymore, so they called an intervention. They had my mom come in, they laid out everything that I had done. And I remember just sitting there and watching my mom just bawl her eyes out and cry. She was so disappointed, and I was disappointed in myself. I didn't know why I did the things I did or why I acted the way I acted, but I did. And so my uncle ended up telling my mom, well, why don't you bring him to church? And so we went to church. And within a few weeks, I was hooked. I had just fallen in love with Jesus, and I wanted him to change my life. I was tired of what used to be. And that fire that my grandma had started when I was younger with that verse about God being my father had really begun to be rekindled. And so I began to be more devoted to Christ. And the children's pastor who led me to the Lord began to mentor me. As my friends began to go to, music practice or sports practice, I began to go to church practice. My children's pastor would just train me in the ways of the Lord and teach me the things of ministry. And I began to realize that I really loved ministry and wanted to be a pastor. So about 7th, 8th grade, I decided I was going to start a ministry in my middle school. And by the time I went into the high school, we were into 60 kids. God was blessing it. It was remarkable. But at the same time, I was really struggling inside. When I'd become a Christian at 12, I also realized at 12 that I was dealing with same-sex attractions, and it just wrecked my world. To realize that I was following Christ and I wanted to do right by Him, but yet I had these desires, and many times even acting upon those desires. And the confusion that it caused me was a huge shake to my reality of trying to rectify these two worlds that just didn't go well together. I continued to serve God in ministry, and He continued to bless it even though I struggled. And over the years, people have asked me, why would God have blessed that ministry when you were struggling so greatly? And my answer to them is because I know that God saw my heart. He saw that I was in regret and not in rebellion. Ministry continued to get blessed, and by the time I was 17, a junior in high school, this local Baptist church in town called up and said, hey, you want to come have your meetings at our church in the west wing of our building? It's vacant. And so we started meeting there, and within a few months they offered me a paid staff position as the youth director. I served on staff there. They sent me off to Moody, and I worked part-time at the church and went full-time at school. But by the end of about 3 years there, it was pretty clear that that wasn't a church that was going to be able to help me with my struggles. And as I got older, I was realizing I needed more and more help. And so I went back to the church that I grew up at and found out the pastor was vacant, and so I began to preach in the pulpit. And after a few months, they realized that we weren't going to find a new pastor, so they just asked me to do the preaching on Sunday morning. And so I continued to do that for my whole first year at Moody. And then at the end of that year, our church got adopted, and we had a new senior pastor come in, and all the pastors went through a re-interview process. And I sat down with him, and we had some real good heart-to-hearts. And he said something to me that I wish a pastor would have said to me years ago. He looked at me and said, Josh, I think well-meaning men of God over the years have overlooked your weaknesses because your strengths seem stronger. And he said, I want to encourage you to just take some time off and just focus on getting better and figuring out your sexuality and focusing on your education. And so I took that opportunity, and I stepped down from my job at the church and spent the whole next year just going through counseling at Moody, joining a celebrate recovery group, really buckling down with some strong accountability with friends, and invited some mentors into my life to just invest in me. And since then, I've just found tremendous leaps and bounds of healing as I've walked out of that darkness and into some light. Not too long ago, I was finally given the opportunity, a platform to share my testimony publicly for the first time, and have seen a lot of people experience healing. It's been amazing to walk out of the darkness and into the light.